나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this podcast finds you well, healthy, secure. In the last couple of videos, podcasts, I've been talking about the portions of the 3,000 Realms doctrine, starting with Tendai, and later adopted by Miaolo and Dengyo, or Saicho, as you called him, and then by Nichiren. Other scholars, of course, used this consideration, this type of elucidation of fundamental aspects of life, of phenomena, more specifically, human samsaric phenomena. Here we go with the glasses again. Anyway, some deviations, as some of you may recall just from Nichiren's letters, were appropriated by other teachers of other sects to satisfy their own school of thinking about Buddhism, for their own benefit, just for political, power grabs. And Nichiren talked at length about. You look at his letter on the errors in 8 schools, and there are several dialogues about this, but that's one that comes to mind that has a good history of how these other teachers in China, it's always after one of these great bodhisattva scholars passes away, then they seize the opportunity like rats of some sort, and they go in and just take apart the great master's teachings and appropriate them and interpret them for their own avarice, really. Anyway, there's a long history of that in humanity. What the heck? You could see that in any discipline. It's just human ego. And Buddhism is not immune to that very kind of thing. Well, we'll just have to live with that smudge. And so, one of the concepts in the 3,000 Realms that we've talked about is the 3 realms. In the 3 realms, the very first realm is one that breaks down even further into the 5 components, or 5 aggregates, or 5 khandas or skandhas. It depends on which language you're reading and so forth, but conceptually it's all the same. And it's an interesting subject to talk about, with one simple caution. As we study these earlier masters, and they were masters, great teachers of their day, you have to consider their audience. And so the possibility here for our understanding of Buddhism and our practice, especially if you're new to Lotus Sutra Buddhism, make no mistake, Nichiren is our modern day teacher. Nichiren's advent in our age, and Shakyamuni Buddha identified this, basically saying that this is the age when human beings' capacity to understand, capacity to integrate and visualize and understand the mechanisms of the mind would be of such a nature that it would now, like a coin, has two sides. We would be far more easily distracted. We're in fact distracted almost all the time. Look at our technology. It's a technology of distraction. The more distraction we get, the more successful we think we are. But we're actually more and more taken away from our core understanding of the preciousness of our lives. All that preciousness is now being invested into items of distraction. All you have to do is look at any broadcast television or even radio, and you'll realize that there's far more time dedicated to commercials and consumerism than there is to the actual program being given to you, because the medium is all about getting you to be distracted. Look over here, look over here, look at this bauble, look at that bauble, look at a new iPhone. It's a phone, but got to have the latest one, or I'm a lesser. I mean, we're really obsessed with our attachments today. Conversely, we need something far more direct to pry open our door of enlightenment, our Buddha nature. But kind of conveniently, we're also so developed in mind that once we're shown the door, we can get to it immediately. We don't have to spend years and years and years to get there. Again, on the bad side, the moment we stop focusing our minds on our Buddha nature, 10,000 distractions. So, Shakyamuni Buddha understood this. But Nichiren understood this implicitly because he is of our time. And he understood that if we were going to access that door, we needed something in our environment, something of our own distraction that would be a target, a focused target on that door of enlightenment. That without it, we could be doomed to years and decades of ritual, chanting, closing our eyes, trying to move our mind around, and just never get there. Because at this time in human development, we're so obsessed with distraction that we think that if we can just get rid of all those distractions, which we can't, but if we could minimize them, that we somehow have reached an altered state. But you've only gotten to the human state. Remember tranquility, the world of tranquility? That's no great accomplishments. That's our baseline. Samsaric baseline. It just means that we're less distracted. And that can feel like an accomplishment. If you're in the lower worlds, then that world can seem quite developed. But that's an illusion. You've just gotten the monkeys to eat lunch. They're still there, right? So the brilliance of Nichiren was that over the years, the more he studied the Lotus Sutra, and by teaching it to others, was teaching himself as well, just as I'm doing here with you, it became more and more apparent that if you just focused on the ultimate teaching, see, Lotus Sutra is a sutra that the Buddha, not Shakyamuni Buddha, taught about his own experience of enlightenment. Whereas everything prior to the Lotus Sutra was him teaching his experience of enlightenment to be understood by the people of his day. And over the years of his teachings, he kept pushing and developing the capacities of the people of his day. But ultimately, I mean, he knew he was getting old. He knew there was only so many years left in his lifetime, and he had to teach the ultimate practice. And it would be over the heads of the people that were his students, although they would get something from it because he would still tell stories. He would still prepare them for this immediate enlightenment. But he knew it wouldn't be until 2,500 years or so after he went extinct that people would have the capacity to get it. Albeit, he only taught verbally, right? There was no writing. There was no taking down. It was all memorization, which is quite a feat and quite a way to teach. We still use it today. How many of you learned your times tables in elementary school, right? Or even the reason you can read and write today is largely because you learned to memorize the alphabet and then memorize words and grammar and so on and so forth. We still use memorizing a lot in order to learn, to teach ourselves something new. And Nichiren was the one prophet, the one bodhisattva, the one great teacher and scholar of our day, although it was hundreds of years ago. Still, as an era, we are in that modern era. He could see that having a visual representation of the teachings, not words. I mean, we take apart the mandala that he made as made of words because what he's captured is the concepts within the Lotus Sutra. This is what enlightenment looks like to you in samsara. And it acts as a doorway because we externalize everything. Everything's a distraction because it's from outside our mind, our perception. So let's drive that perception home to Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Buddhahood itself, surrounded by the ultimate teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha, and use it as a trick, as we take our samsaric mind and say, look here, focus. And then we chant with sound that we hear, that we see, and we feel. All our senses, which in Buddhism are consciousnesses. And by doing that, we slowly silence the monkey farm back there all screaming at us. And we deafen them with our own sound. And that sound is of the law of Buddhahood. And so this is the great accomplishment of Nichiren. He gave us the tool to do what Shakyamuni was teaching us to do, to focus our mind on this enlightenment. And the Gohonzon is Nichiren's representation in our mind of transitioning from our samsaric awareness to our Buddha-ness. Gohonzon is an internal mental condition, a doorway to Buddha. This is why he tells us to single-mindedly pursue Buddha in our minds, our Buddha mind. Because Buddha is not a man. It's not a seated man in a lotus. It's a mental condition. And we open that mental condition through our Gohonzon, our doorway, our wisdom. There's a lot of names for it. So this mandala is that object, like a mirror that reflects, that is a tool to focus our minds, our Gohonzon, the internal Gohonzon, to open up our Buddha awareness, our Buddha mind. No other prophet or teacher before Nichiren came up with that because they didn't live in this era. They didn't understand the complete immersion into constant distraction that our minds would have to defeat in order to open this gate. As Nagarjuna calls them, the 12 gates. So this is a consistent conversation in Buddhism from the get-go. But the device in order to accomplish it immediately for you and I in this era, Nichiren is our teacher. So if you have that firmly implanted in your mind and you're studying Lotus Sutra Buddhism via the doctrine of Nichiren, then this is your appropriate path to understanding your enlightenment. But these other subjects that I touch on, Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Tendai, or Julius Evola, which we'll read some of his discoveries of early Buddhist texts, we don't study those texts to replace Nichiren. What we do in our study is look at these earlier ideas about what we're experiencing today that they didn't experience then, and the language they used to explain the concepts then, because as we do so, our own insights will substantiate what we now know. A lot of things we know today, we don't understand why we know or how we know. There can be room for occasional doubt because we don't feel secure in our understanding of certain concepts. Sure, this is why we study older texts from Buddhism, because they speak to lesser understandings, lesser capacities. But for us, we can see right through them because we have that capacity. But these older texts give us personally different clues, different insights. And a lot of times when you read these older texts, you'll go, oh, I know what that means now. I know where that comes from. Oh, I didn't understand it in these modern terms. But now that I reread these same concepts from 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, the way they approach teaching this, that's more familiar to me. Now I get it. With the depth of what I'm doing now, I understand what they were saying then. It's an aid to strengthen our confidence, our insight into every aspect of that which we're doing. Do we need to know all of this in order to chant well and enlighten ourselves? No. No, but it can be hugely helpful as we live in our samsaric human mind. That's the one that gets distracted all the time, right? And we can forget. When somebody asks us, why do you chant? Blah, 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 blah. Right? But when we study, I think I can answer that. Because I now have some language, some concepts, some ideas that support what I do when I chant, that are much easier to discuss with a non-Buddhist. And it helps raise my confidence of, yeah, I really know why. So this is why we study, not to replace Nichiren or our modern practice of Buddhism, but to augment, spackle the holes. All right? So I just wanted to be real clear on that. I ate up a good bit of time talking about that, but it's important that you realize that I provide all this information as kind of a library of support for our Myoho Renge Kyo, our practice, our invocation of our Buddha. Our, because Buddha is Buddha, but ours because in samsara, in our identification as a unique being, albeit an illusion and all the talk about that, it's a real experience. And Buddhism is about the experience of Buddhahood. And you can only have an experience of Buddhahood if you're having experience, which only happens when you're instantiated in this human body that's capable of manifesting this mind. Do you see? So we have a brief time in the universe to realize this. Good that we have a mechanism that can instantiate it immediately. Need some mouth lubrication. Okay. So, being as the first of the three realms that I discussed, starts talking about these 5 components. I have a whole study book here on Vasubandhu, but because that's ancient language and stuff, it can really bog you down with what the hell is he talking about, and the method of argumentation. Same thing with Nagarjuna. So my hat's off to a lot of scholars like Stephen Anaker, who put together a tremendous amount of work to anglicize Vasubandhu's work. And we may read from it or not. There are 2 books, though, or actually 1, but this other book that I don't know if I made this available on my bookstore or not. I have a book called Tendai Lotus Texts. And this book, which I've talked about before, is an excellent primer for early Buddhism. Julius Evola, The Doctrine of Awakening. It says in the middle, the attainment of self-mastery according to the earliest Buddhist texts. So this would be early from Hinayana to early Mahayana teachings. But this gentleman, he was an Italian, and he was part of, when was this done? This was early 1922, 1923. Julius lived from 1898 to 1974. Amazing. I don't know when this was first published. I'm looking. Yeah, all of this printing is about 1995. But at the time that he was a researcher, there are references to early 19th century dates, or 20th century, sorry. 1912, 1916, 1919. The reason I wanted to bring that out is that he had an early experience of these texts. During the last years of the 1930s, I devoted myself to working on 2 of my most important books on Eastern wisdom. I completely revised the Potenza, Man is Power, and Yoga is Power. But he had a certain worldview. He was Italian and very closely related with German scholars. And so he speaks a lot of the Aryan invasion of the Indus Peninsula, the whole of India, actually. And I've been recently reading about Gandhara, or Gandhara, which was the area which is now divided up between India, the Peshawar, and Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other parts of Eastern Asia. This area that was Gandhara was the seat or the paradise of Buddhism for a couple of centuries, from 200 BCE to about 300 CE. So toward the shift of the millennia, interestingly enough, an area where very much the stories about the 18 lost years of Christ and other things, other religions, the Iranians took over that part of the world. There was a lot of exchange of different Eastern, Western cultures all throughout that northeast region of India. And it was known as a repository of a tremendous amount of Buddhist scholarship. So that's fascinating, and also points to the different languages that were used to document this. And not long ago, a whole treasure trove of very fragile transcripts were found. And it speaks a lot to the history of the area and Buddhism, and again, very much several times of the invading forces of Aryan armies and peoples. And it was rather quite common in the day picture this in our era of such divisive, I'm better than you and you're better. This is this warring competition for who's best, who's first, who's authoritative. In those days, they were more you could say pan-religious or pan-philosophical. It was very common for the people of the day to practice in more than one discipline, or more to the point, Buddhists were very open to understandings of the different world religions that were mixing through that area. It's hard to imagine that today, isn't it? Not that that's the way to go, but there was an environment to foster a lot of dialogue and scholarship. So their worldview was very different, but a lot of their worldview, as I'm reading now, included this Aryan influx back and forth. So there is a lot of substantiation to what Julius is indicating. But don't let that be an obstacle, because his dissection, and I'm speaking specifically in regard to the 3,000 realms, of the flame of samsaric consciousness, just that wording is quite a big clue and resonant with what I've been saying to you so far. Is that, and all the time, that our Buddha, our awakened mind, is an awakening of the samsaric consciousness. What we awaken is in this present form. This human mind is what we awaken, right? The attainment of self-mastery. Do you see? So, from that point of view, even though this is early Buddhism, very, very interesting as a student of Nichiren's doctrine of Lotus Sutra to read where some of these ideas were still forming for the population at that time. The first sentence. In order to understand the Buddha's teachings, we must start from the idea that to the man it had in mind, the Atma Brahman, the immortal and immutable I, quote unquote, identical with the supreme essence of the universe, would not be a concept, quote, conforming to reality, yatha bhutam, based, that is to say, on the actual evidence of experience, but rather that would only be a speculation, a creation of philosophy or theology. The doctrine of awakening aims at being entirely realistic. From the realistic point of view, the immediate evidence for such a man is what we have already called samsaric consciousness. Buddhism proceeds to analyze this consciousness and to determine the truth corresponding to it, summarized in the theory of universal impermanence and insubstantiality, anatta. So he starts from the get-go. He starts from the idea that this Brahman idea that's been around long before Buddhism has the man as a spiritual equivalent to an eternal self, a soul, a bag of conditions that you are that go on through time and only in this lifetime walk the planet. And Buddhism completely destroys this from the start. So please understand once again that you hear any Buddhist talking about multiple lifetimes or reincarnation, that has nothing to do with Buddhism. That is Hinduism, it's other things. Even Jainism has that quality to it, that it has a soul. That's not Buddhism. However, it can be confusing because as we read, not Evola, but actual sutras from the early days, the stories that are his vehicle of teaching often include stories and rhetoric that's over and over again talking about in previous lifetimes I was this and now blah, 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 blah. Because that's where the people were stuck. That's how they understood that was their worldview. And so Shakyamuni used what they knew in order to step them closer to what's really going on. And this is why, one of the reasons why the Lotus Sutra is seen so different from all of those provisional teachings. Because in the Lotus, he dispenses with that. He starts out in expedient means in the beginning of the Lotus Sutra, explaining to everyone how all this time has been story time. I've never really told the truth. Now, forget all that. Now and only now will I teach the absolute truth. And by that he meant, let's forget about all the folklore, what you've grown up with, cultural biases. Here's the real deal. And in the 16th chapter, the lifespan of Tathagata, that's his mic drop moment. He goes, you guys keep calling me Buddha because you think this is what Buddha is. And in reality, Buddha is not me. I'm just a man, Shakyamuni, a teacher. And Buddha is something that has existed since time immemorial. Right? The numbers, innumerable, unfathomable, all these numbers, these equations to make you lose your mind trying to think of when time existed. Buddha's been around all that time. And it will continue to be around. In fact, it's already part of who you are. This is what I discovered. This is the great aha moment of the Lotus Sutra. This is the teaching that Nichiren was able to talk about in our era. And once again, repeat what scholars for hundreds and thousands of years before him were saying without being completely understood, is that this is the teaching that shows you how to directly experience your Buddha, the Buddha, without distraction, without any other method. All you need to do is open your mind to it. Open your samsaric consciousness to its Buddha state. Right? And from this, Evola continues, and I'll let you read it for yourself. I'll just pick out certain areas. It's very well written, and I challenge you not to understand. So he talks about conditioned genesis, which is the 9 consciousnesses, which I'm getting to. It goes all the way back to dukkha, anicca, and anatta, the four noble truths. I have a couple of things highlighted. On this basis, the Buddhist theory of samsara has been able to develop as far as the theory of instantaneousness or instantaneous existence. Now, you might read that without any study and think, what is that? Like the magical puff where somebody suddenly steps out of a little puff? Is that magic? No, what he's talking about is what I've talked to you about, because we know through Nichiren that we live moment to moment. That life is this continuum of discrete moments where we parse out our experience. This is why we never are. We're always becoming. Right? Is the moment you think you understand who you are, you're not that person anymore. You're the next moment of that person, of that collective, of kinetic momentum energy plus work, karma, right? We know this. So the language about it then was the theory of instantaneousness, a point, kana in Pali. If existence and the sense of I are conditioned by contacts, this existence must resolve itself into the point series of these same contacts, points. In this sense, strictly speaking, life is instantaneous, just as in the Buddhist image of the wheel of a wagon whose movement is continuous, but which, moving on or at rest, touches the ground at only one point. In the same way, the life of beings has only the duration of a thought. The being of the past moment has lived, but does not live, and will not live. The being of the future moment will live, but does not live, and has not lived. The being of the present moment lives, but has not lived, and will not live. Oh, my. Do you see, with our current mind and the scholarship that we have of, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but now when we go back and we read something like this old text of earlier teachings, it's been there all along. And then the next chapter is conditioned Genesis, which is where I will talk about the 9 consciousnesses. And this, of course, this conditioned Genesis is about the Nidana. So you see, there's another complicator or multiplier in our 3,000 realms that isn't identified as such in the 9,000 realms. I'll show you a drawing I have somewhere. I've put it up on the website before. I'll put it up here. The 9 consciousness is how our Daimoku penetrates through all of them. But it's a handy little visual list of these 9 consciousnesses and what they are or what they do. It's a long chapter. Just amazing. You could read this all day long. It's just so well written. I was really, I just serendipitously found this. Where did I hear? I heard about the author. I don't remember, but it was very serendipitous. I chased it down. It was hard to find. But the ISBN is 978-0892-0892. Sorry. Start over, Selene. 978-0892-815531. That's the full ISBN. You can look that up. Tendai spoke about this a lot. And I already quoted a lot of what the doctor had to say about in her translation of the importance of the Lotus Sutra, or the fundaments of Lotus Sutra. Now, these are random writings of Chi, and he talks about the worlds as dharmas, or dhammas. The Dharma as realization also has 5 types. The Dharma as realization also has 5 types. That's an interesting way to put the experience of one of the worlds, right? The worlds are a realization, a crystallization of a certain facet of mind, right? The world of hunger, which we're never in completely, but we hover around with other worlds interpenetrating, right? The realized experience of that world is another way to say how we experience the world, right? That's a filter. It's like on a camera where you use different filters to, well, these days. But if you can imagine a camera with a lens, an actual camera, not a phone, where you could drop in these different colored lenses or diffusers or whatever in front of a lens. You could change how the light penetrates the lens and therefore how the photograph looks, right? That's kind of like an analogy you could use for the worlds. Now, these fives were what it is, how it is, what it resembles, what characteristics it has, and five, what is its essence. There's also another meaning in regard to all dhammas or states and so on. What they are means what they are either conditioned or unconditioned. How they are means whether they're caused or uncaused. What they resemble. Now, what does that mean? Caused or uncaused? Conditioned or unconditioned? Now we're getting into five aggregates territory. Eternal or non-eternal. What characteristics they have means they have either the three markings of arising, abiding, and decay. There we go with moment to moment. Arising, abiding, decay, birth, life, death. Birth, life, death, every moment. Or the three marks of non-arising, and so on. What essence they have means they have either an essence of the five aggregates or an essence of not the five aggregates. And this really is about, he talks about it here, what essence they have, the subjective and the objective aspects of the five aggregates, since the five aggregates are the essence that appropriates suffering. Moreover, the five aggregates are the essence of the truth of the path. So let's dig into that a little bit as we come closer and closer now to the five aggregates. Basically, what Tendai is talking about there is a difference in perception. Is this pain I feel in my gut something that pre-exists, some aspect of the universe that I'm just suddenly experiencing, unconditioned, uncaused, simply appears? Or does it appear because it's a result of a long string of various constructs of energy and work, karma, that are now manifesting in this moment? So this is what he means by this suffering is conjured by a mind that perceives suffering because it perceives it as a result. And it is, in fact, a result of a lot of conditions that have arrived at this particular moment, this particular place. But here's the trick of the tale. If I change my perceptive mind from this human conditioned experience to my Buddha mind, which is unconditioned, uncaused, always there and available, if I shift my perspective to Buddha mind, then I understand that although in samsara I can see the chain of events and causation that brought about this bellyache, that in my Buddha mind, I just see it as an assemblage of assumptions and causes and karma, and I'm unaffected by it. I don't experience the bellyache because that's something happening there. I'm not there. The I is experiencing that, not Buddha. It's a subtle change and it's hard to identify, but when we chant to mandala, that's what we get to. We open that gate, that door. Follow? And here it is, Tendai, in his own words, trying to define that very thing. Dharma as realization illustrates the Dharma as conditioned and as unconditioned, just as it says in the Lotus Sutra. And here Tendai, the great scholar of the Lotus Sutra, identifies at that time in the Great Assembly there were disciples, arhats, who were free of depravities, beginning with Ajnata Kaundandinya, 12,000 in all, monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, who had set out to become disciples or self-enlightened Buddhas. Remember, this was the pinnacle of Hinayana. I think Theravada as well, an arhat. Each of them thought, why has the Buddha so wholeheartedly praised expedient means and said the Dharma that the Buddhas have attained is profound and difficult to comprehend? The import of what they say is difficult to understand. None of the disciples of self-enlightened Buddhas are capable of knowing it. In other words, he's pointed directly at us and tells us we haven't achieved what we think we have achieved. As long as the Buddha taught the meaning of one emancipation, I thought I had also attained that Dharma and reached nirvana. Right? This is the point, if you'll recall from the Lotus Sutra, where all of these Hinayanists, these arhats, stand up in the middle of the assembly at Vulture Peak or Eagle Peak. This is the story early in the Lotus Sutra now. And they all walk out on him. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And Buddha remains silent, lets them walk out. And after they leave, he looks at the rest of the audience and he says, well, now that they're gone, let me divulge to you the actual path to complete and perfect enlightenment. We don't need them. They think they've already reached it, but their arrogance is going to keep them from hearing this ultimate teaching. And wouldn't you know, we're still dealing with that today. There's no more adamant disagreement amongst groups who are practicing that are still today, although this is not the era for it, practicing practices of Buddhist teachings that are well beyond the time period they were supposed to be used. They're not effective anymore. They're an aberration. In fact, Nichiren tells us they're actually working against Buddhism. They stubbornly cling to old ideas. They are ichantika. They're stuck. And of course, Lotus Sutra Buddhists, or even just later Mahayanists, they're constantly at war, not physically at war, but with words, arrogance on who's right and who's wrong. But it's obvious, right? It's sad, I would say, that these people with all of their practice and all of their knowledge can't get past themselves. Complete and perfect enlightenment is enlightenment of everyone, not just yourself. That's incredibly selfish. And that was never Shakyamuni's vision from the get-go. Remember, we talked about this. Siddhartha started out looking for a universal way that all sentient and insentient beings could liberate themselves from the sufferings of life. Not annihilate life, not wait until life was done, but in the here and now, how do we live well? How do we live joyfully, appreciatively? Life is an amazing, precious thing. Why don't we live with that in mind all the time? What causes all this unease, mental distress? Stress is the used word in early translations. This is what Shakyamuni called suffering, or some words to that effect. He talks about doubt, read one more little portion here where he quotes the Lotus Sutra. The meaning of doubt that is based on a certain event means those in the assembly became doubtful when they heard the Tathagata say, the emancipation of the disciples is neither different nor distinct from my emancipation. Do you see how in the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni was talking about his own enlightenment? He hadn't done that explicitly before. He only referred to it as a guide for those who were practicing in stories based on their mythology, their worldview, to get them to start to understand how they could alter their consciousness. In the Lotus Sutra, he talks about his own consciousness. The skeptics became doubtful about the reason for this statement, saying, what is this all about, since the Tathagata uses various means to explain his profound realm. The profundity of what he explains in the beginning is different from the profundity of what he explains in the end. Yeah, the 5 stages, the 5 periods of teachings, right, as he slowly raised the people's capacity. This is why they became doubtful, just as it says in the Lotus Sutra. At the time, Shariputra, being aware of the doubt in the minds of those in the fourfold assembly, and being in doubt himself, addressed the Buddha, saying, because he was an arhat, saying, O Blessed One, what is the cause and what is the reason for your wholehearted praise of the foremost expedient means of the Buddhas and their profound and subtle dharma that is difficult to understand? Never before have I heard the Buddha say anything like this. Now the fourfold assembly is in doubt. Please, O Blessed One, explain this matter. O Blessed One is a translation, a convenient English bias. It's the thus come one, right? Why have you so wholeheartedly praised this profound and subtle dharma that is difficult to understand? Thereupon Shariputra, wanting to further explain what he meant, spoke these verses. Hereafter shown an explanation of the 4 things regarding the Tathagata. It should be known that these 4 are the Tathagata's fixed resolve, the Tathagata's reason for the prediction, his taking the prediction, and giving the prediction. The Tathagata's determination. So, right, we're already seeing early in the Lotus Sutra that resolve, dedication, determination is an explicit part, requisite to opening that Buddha mind. You can't just pick it up off the shelf and wear it like a hat. You have to be determined to silence the monkeys and experience Buddha single-mindedly, just as Nichiren said. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. Tendai's understanding of the Lotus Sutra, it's amazing. Yeah. All right, so don't know if I've said enough about the actual aggregates. So I'm looking for something that really dissects the aggregates. I know I've already talked about them in to some depth. So yeah, there's a lot of words in here. The 5 aggregates are the aggregate of materialities, the aggregate of feelings, the aggregate of cognition, the aggregate of motivational dispositions, and the aggregate of consciousnesses. So, You can do a lot of research for yourselves on these, but what I will tell you, fundamentally, the aggregates are something you've heard me talk about through many, many videos. It's this assemblage, this magical, not magic isn't the word I want, this amazing, really, because it's actual, not magical. Seems that way, though. This thing is energy and work, this karma, that then becomes a photon, a proton, a neutron. Then somehow the action and the work continues, and these things combine in certain ways into a hydrogen atom or an oxygen atom, or, the sun is this constant manufacturing facility for photons and energy because of the reactions of combinatory and breaking apart of atoms, simple atoms, forms of hydrogen, deuterium, what's the word? Anyway, you can look into the chemistry of the sun. It's very, very simple chemistry. And the fact that those little energetic things can produce this amazing amount of energy that in one day supplies all the energy that mankind would use in a year. It's just, the universe, just studying a little cosmology blows the mind. And to think that about 3,000 years ago, the discussion was lively about how this was all working in the context of life, even down to a human or an insect, right? That these energies, vast as they are, could combine in so many myriad ways as to instantiate cells, molecules, DNA, and arrange themselves in such a manner they could produce sensory organs and a consciousness. It's amazing. And the aggregates, and this is why it's like learning to be a doctor. The aggregates, Vasubandhu's treatises about these aggregates, these skandhas, these compounds, was to demonstrate how at a very early stage, before eyeballs, consciousness, brains, skin, before humans, before a planet that could support a human, there was an inclination. And this is the fascinating thing about karma. Remember, karma is energy plus work. So, if I wield an axe at a log, I'm creating a lot of work. And I put a certain amount of energy behind it in order to chop through a log. But what the aggregates point out is that in order for me to have the thought, make an incision in this log, cut this log, I had to put myself in a position where that was something I could do, which means I have to create a tool that will do it, because I can't do it with my hand. It's too fragile. So how do I do it? I have to make an axe, something I call an axe. And then I have to wield it a certain way with a certain amount of power, energy. And then the work that I do is stacked on top of the work that I did to create the handle, to create the axe head, to create the situation physically. Oh, that's right. I need legs. I need a body. I need a way to hold the axe that puts me in a position to where I can wield it to cut the log. And he keeps taking apart the act. It's like programming a robot, right? I remember when I was first practicing or learning how to program in Fortran, we had to, the teacher would say, try to teach a robot how to brush its teeth. And everybody says, well, first you grab the toothbrush, and the teacher stopped. What the hell's a toothbrush? And how does the robot reach for the toothbrush? Does the robot have an arm? Does it have a hand? Does it have fingers? Does it know that a toothbrush isn't 3 tons heavy, or that it's just an ounce? And all of a sudden, everyone in the class goes, oh, crap, telling a robot how to do something is amazing. How do we know all of this stuff? Right? We're this self-training, absorbing robot of sorts. I don't mean to... What I'm getting at is, we're an assemblage of consciousnesses that had to have, from the moment energy and work began to instantiate into something, work toward these different aspects, these different ways of cognition. In other words, like the eye consciousness. We had to first conjure the idea that there would be something to be seen. And what is seeing? What is seeing? Well, seeing involves distinguishing self from other. Boy, everything starts from there. This is why samsaric condition is about distinguishing, identifying and taking apart every little thing. Because in order to have this experience, we had to do all of that before this could exist. This is the result. Our lifetime, our samsaric world universe, self, other, is constructed from the very start of energy and work. That is the amazing message of the aggregates. So when we talk about cause and effect, we tend to think of cause as, I'm going to slap that hand, and the effect being that loud clap. But what we have to realize is that cause and effect has a much more involved process at its root. So again, like programming the computer, if I want to do this, what are the prerequisites to getting to that? Not just hands, not just arms, not just a body, not just ears, sight, feeling, right? How do you hear that sound? With your ears. How do you have ears? What are ears? What do they do? How did they get here? So Vasubandhu took all of this apart to the nth degree. It's Buddhism, minutia. And it looks at the very formations and has to reason that in order for formations to start choosing what direction they're going into, there has to be some sort of formative idea or thought that wishes to be experienced in order for certain things to happen. Like making a body that has sight. And what is sight? And what do I do with it? It senses light. Okay, once I sense light, I can bounce it off of some other thing, and then what do I do with it? How do I identify it? How do I specify it? And we start building a brain, right? I've already talked about this in different ways. But this is the skandhas. That without this huge construct of a mind of experience that's constantly distinguishing everything, we then discover, oh, that's kind of the trap. That's kind of what's gotten in my way. Especially today, who doesn't spend half their day staring at a little tablet in their hand? We're constantly using vision, sound, sometimes sound made by us, most times sound listened to by us, feeling it, right? Haptic feedback. How did we get here? Now that we're here, it's incredibly difficult to let go of the success of these formations. Not to get rid of them, not to annihilate them, but to experience them without this tremendous force of attachment. When you realize that from quiescent energy, with a little work, comes an instantiation of a photon or a fermion or an electron or a proton, even before atoms. And you start multiplying that all the way to you. Look at the freight train of karma that's behind you. Before you even instantiate in a womb to become a human, which itself is an evolution, right? Why don't you come out of an egg? Why don't you sit in a mother's pouch? Well, some of us do, but it's a pouch we create, not one that's, well, conundrum. I was thinking of kangaroos, marsupials. But we create either one, right? So yeah, take a moment to consider how much energy and work has gone into this instantiation, where now you, with your conscious mind, can now be directly involved with the results and condition them even further, influence them. Your whole body, every moment, birth, death, is reinstantiating that energy because it's kinetic. You just keep going, but you can influence it. You can move it over here a little bit. And then it creeps back to where it's this massive freight train. And then you move it over there a little, and over time you find, okay, I'll just be here. Right? This is essentially what we're doing with our practice of Buddhism. We're influencing that freight train, and we're giving it a new perspective, an enlightened perspective, a perspective that doesn't require conditioning. Although we get to it by conditioning, ultimately it's unconditioned because it's always been there. Now maybe you can understand the function of the skandhas. And next video, yeah, that's long enough. Woo, that went a long time. All right, so the next video we'll dive right into the 9 consciousnesses. If you think I haven't repeated in it and looked at the 5 skandhas in enough different directions so that you can get the gist of it, because I don't want to teach you ancient language, but I do want you to get it conceptually, you will see it in the 9 consciousnesses. I'll refer to it. I won't let you miss it. But if you think you'd like to know more about the roots of the 5 consciousnesses, I might dedicate, or I might send you some reading material to dive into on your own. If I have enough requests, though, I definitely will make more videos solely about those 5 skandhas. I'm not averse to doing that. I just don't want to get bogged down or bog you down in concepts that start taking your focus away and creating doubts and so forth. I want you to stay focused in your practice. That's the primary thing. That's what I'm most concerned about, that you strengthen your chanting and your mindset to give you great confidence in opening your Buddha mind. Okay? So with all of that, thank you so much. You're so generous with your time and all of your supports. Hi, Marion. Thank you for listening, sticking with it. Like, subscribe, share. Got to say that. It's a YouTube imperative. In the meantime, please do take care of your health. Be kind to yourself and others. And I will see you soon.